The head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, has openly betrayed Vladimir Putin and no longer sends Kadyrovites, that is, Chechens, to Putin's war. Remember those videos from 2022 when crowds of Kadyrovites with cameras were shouting Akhmat Sila, and Kadyrov himself was threatening to reach London and so on? Back then, Kadyrovites were even called the TikTok troops, and now, think about when was the last time you heard anything about Chechens in this war? I think all those videos suddenly disappeared somewhere. Exactly, they haven't been around for a long time. And today, The Economist explained why the Kadyrovites suddenly vanished from the news. It turns out that Kadyrov is simply sabotaging the deployment of his people to the front in Ukraine, while continuing to make impressive appearances in front of the cameras and calling himself Putin's foot soldier. Let's break down this story in detail now, because in fact, Kadyrov told the aging Vladimir Putin, "Listen, this is your war, you fight it yourself. There won't be any Chechens there. You started the war, now you deal with it yourself." My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's dive into this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I would appreciate every subscription. So, according to The Economist, a source close to the Chechen leadership said that despite his public loyalty to the Kremlin, Ramzan Kadyrov is actually not ready to send large numbers of Chechen residents to fight against Ukraine. The source told The Economist the following, verbatim: "The interests of Chechnya simply no longer align with the Kremlin's goals in Ukraine, and Kadyrov does not want to sacrifice the republic's population for the so-called Russian world. Although he himself supposedly boasts about his role as Putin's foot soldier, he understands the real situation perfectly well. The point is that Kadyrov has simply realized that there will no longer be a quick victory. And so, as if he told Putin, from now on, you're on your own." And now the numbers, which expose this whole story with the pompous shouts of Akhmat is power. Well, really, what kind of power? Let's figure it out now. Kadyrov. Let me remind you, publicly stated, Kadyrov claims that Chechnya has sent more than 70,000 Chechen fighters to the front. This is roughly comparable to about 10% of the entire male population of Chechnya. It certainly sounds impressive, but here's the reality. Chechens account for only about 0.2% of the total confirmed losses of the Russian army. So, either the figure of 70,000 is just made up to look good, or Chechens are really being kept at the front in such a way so that they don't really get killed there. In other words, they're kept away from the front line. And, well, so that they can create an intimidating image, but nothing more than that. And apparently it's the second option that's true. Sources claim that Chechen servicemen are allegedly directly advised to take care of themselves and not go to the front lines. Let ordinary Russians, and maybe the Buryats, go die, they say, but the Kadyrovites will just film victorious videos. Well, some ordinary Russian died, so what? Who cares about him? Who is even interested in some ordinary Russian? Admit it, it sounds funny for an army that, according to Kadyrov, was supposed to reach London, but somehow they still don't go to the front lines. They're heading to London, but they absolutely refuse to go to the very front line. And now let's remember how it all started in the first place, because the contrast here is really striking. In 2022, Kadyrov's men were nicknamed the TikTok troops. Their squads, averaging about 200 people, were accompanied by an entire army of videographers who filmed these victorious reports on several cameras at once. No other Russian unit had that many cameramen on staff. Every Chechen who appeared on camera was required to personally address the so-called Padishah, that is, Ramzan Kadyrov himself, with an assurance of carrying out the order. Showmanship was the main product, not combat results. The main product was a beautiful video, and that's where the disconnect from reality began. Already in the first days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, their column, that is, the Kadyrovites column, was destroyed by Bayraktar strikes. Dozens of Chechen mercenaries were killed. Even Russian soldiers themselves mocked them. And let me remind you, this is that old meme video from an intercepted conversation. One Russian occupier literally says to his wife, quote, "Akhmat Silla guys ran off." Sorry, but that's a quote. And they were also used as blocking detachments, that is, units that were supposed to shoot at their own retreating Russian soldiers. Well, actually not their own. They understand that the Russian Ivan is not unfair to them. Plus, the Kadyrovites were also involved in war crimes, including the massacre in Bucha. So that loud image of invincible Islamic warriors turned out to be just a propaganda show with cameras, not a real fighting force. But even that show, as you can see, has disappeared somewhere. Back in September 2022, when Vladimir Putin announced a general mobilization across all of Russia, Kadyrov, at a meeting with his operational headquarters, stated that there would be no mobilization in Chechnya because the Republic had supposedly already exceeded its quota thanks to volunteers. Remember, there were supposedly 70,000 of them. It is telling that just a few days later, his own press secretary Ilman Vakidov began to deny the reports that mobilization in Chechnya had been cancelled, stating that all this was the work of some opposition publications and foreign agents. Like, Kadyrov never said that. What are you talking about? So even then, back in 2022, there was a clear inconsistency. On one hand, Kadyrov publicly said there would be no mobilization, and on the other hand, his own press service tried to cover it up and pretend that nothing significant had been said. So even back then, it was already clear that the Kadyrovites were just for show. Like, look, the Kadyrovites, they're used to ordinary Russians being afraid of them. Objectively, there were so many videos from Russia showing a Kadyrovite getting out of a car and everyone, just shitting their pants. Right. Remember those videos from Russia when those Kadyrovites were walking around Moscow with automatic rifles shooting into the air? The idea was that Ukrainians, just like those Russians, they would just see a Kadyrovite and get scared. That's a Kadyrovite, but that didn't happen. Well, they got it a bit wrong. These Kadyrovites, remember Kadyrov said, "Zelensky, I'm coming for you." Somehow he didn't make it, apparently. And now here, 4 years later, The Economist basically confirms that the story from 2022 wasn't a one-time episode. It was Kadyrov's systematic strategy. According to the publication's assessment, Kadyrov managed to avoid large-scale forced mobilization in the Republic at that time, and at the same time used the war itself to strengthen his own image as the defender of the Chechen people. That is, he loudly supports Putin on camera and quietly protects his own people from the real war. This is a classic move of a smaller dictator within a bigger dictatorship, you know? So, inside Chechnya, he acts like a hero who didn't send his own people to war, but at the same time, he publicly says, "If you let me, I'll go and kill Zelensky. We'll even make it to London." So that's the situation. Why is Kadyrov able to do this at all? That can also be explained simply, and it's not just about Kadyrov's cunning. The thing is, local residents over the age of 35 remember the devastating Chechen wars very well. The bombings, the sweeps, all the things the Republic already went through under Yeltsin and early Vladimir Putin. And in this society, there is practically no support for a new big war that could take away yet another generation of Chechen men. So Kadyrov is basically just reading the mood of his own people and understands that a real mass mobilization could cost him much more than some dissatisfaction from that bald dwarf Vladimir Putin. So, if you put it all together, in 2022, the Chechens were the loudest, most hyped part of Russian propaganda, with cameras, slogans, and promises to reach London. But in reality, they turned out to be a showpiece unit with minimal real losses, which by now, in 2026, has completely faded into the shadows. Because their own Padishah decided that Putin's war is not a reason to send his fellow countrymen to die for somebody else's Russian world. Like, you know, it's easy to call yourself Putin's foot soldier, but it's a whole different story when it comes to real coffins coming back to the Republic. From all this, we can draw one simple conclusion. It doesn't just concern Chechens, not just Kadyrovites, but the entire underdeveloped Russian Federation as a whole. The conclusion is this. The Russian bear is only great and mighty in words. But when this bear gets punched in the face, it suddenly becomes an ordinary animal, a hunted animal that is afraid, that hides, that just sucks its paw and that's it. That's the real Russian bear, not the one they portray. The same goes for the story with Kadyrov. All his brave fighters just disappeared, and you know who keeps fighting? Ordinary Russian Ivans, whom nobody feels sorry for at all. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.